On a fresh and sunny Saturday morning, the streets of the small town were quiet except for the soft hum of early risers going about their day. The local farmers' market had just wrapped up its busiest hour, and Henry, a kind, gentle man in his late 60s, walked slowly down the street with his granddaughter, Amara, by his side. Henry's steps were steady but unhurried, and Amara matched his pace, clutching a small brown paper bag filled with fresh peaches. They had just bought them from a farmer Henry had known for decades. The two had a tradition that had never been broken in years. After the market, they always stopped at the corner cafe. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the quiet moments they shared there. The cafe was small but warm, with wooden chairs, big front windows, and the scent of fresh coffee drifting out onto the sidewalk. It was the kind of place where regulars knew each other by name, and the waitress always smiled when Henry and Amara walked in. Amara's excitement was obvious. She skipped a little as they approached the cafe, holding the peaches close like a treasure. "Grandpa," she said with a bright smile, "do you think they still have the peach pie today?" Henry chuckled, his deep voice gentle. "If they do, I think we might just have to share a big slice. Fresh peaches from the market. Peach pie at the cafe? Sounds like a perfect morning to me." The bell above the cafe door jingled as they stepped inside. The warm air wrapped around them, carrying the smell of baked bread, cinnamon, and roasted coffee beans. The chatter of a few customers mixed with the soft clinking of cups. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room. Henry held the door open for Amara, as he always did, and they joined the short line at the counter. In front of them, a few customers chatted quietly while looking at the pastry display. Behind the counter, the young barista smiled and waved when she saw Henry. Amara began scanning the menu, even though she already knew what she wanted. As they waited, a woman in her 50s walked in and joined the line behind them. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. She had a firm, almost impatient way of standing, her arms folded, her gaze darting around the room as though she were judging everything she saw. Her name, though Henry didn't know it yet, was Carol, and she was known around town for being outspoken and often critical of others. Amara leaned toward Henry and whispered something about adding whipped cream to her pie, making him smile. But then, as if the peaceful moment had been disturbed by a sudden chill, Carol's voice carried through the air, not loud enough to shout, but just enough so others could hear. She made a comment under her breath, something about how some people like to crowd places they didn't belong. Henry's eyes stayed forward, not reacting. He had lived long enough to know when it was wiser to hold his peace. Amara, though, noticed the tone. Her brows furrowed slightly, but she said nothing. She looked up at her grandfather, curious why he didn't respond, but he gave her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder, as if telling her silently, "It's not worth it right now." The line moved slowly, giving Carol more opportunity to murmur little remarks to herself, though her voice carried just enough for Henry and Amara to hear. She eyed Amara's hair, a thick crown of soft curls tied back with a bright yellow ribbon, and smirked in a way that made Amara feel small without even knowing why. When they finally reached the counter, the barista greeted them warmly. "Morning, Henry. And hello, Amara. I saved the last slice of peach pie just for you two." Amara's face lit up. They placed their order, peach pie, 2 cups of tea, and a small scone for later. Henry paid, and the barista promised to bring everything to their table. As they stepped away from the counter toward a corner table, Carol's voice came again, a little sharper this time. "Isn't it nice when people stick to their own neighborhoods? Keeps things simple." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment. A couple of other customers glanced over, unsure how to react, and then looked away. Henry didn't turn around. His grip on Amara's shoulder stayed steady, guiding her to their seat. Amara felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't understand. Why someone would say something like that, especially in a place that smelled like warm bread and felt like home. She wanted to ask her grandfather why the woman was speaking that way, but something about his calm, quiet expression made her hold the question for later. Once they sat down, Amara rested her chin in her hands, staring out the window. Henry reached over and tapped the table gently to get her attention. "Do you know why I love coming here with you?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "Because," Henry said with a soft smile, "we get to share moments like this. The world, outside, can say and do many things, but in here, at our table, we choose peace." She tried to smile back, but the weight of the woman's tone still lingered in her mind. She wondered why some people seemed to look for reasons to be unkind. The peach pie arrived soon after, golden crust flaking perfectly under the fork, the filling sweet and warm. Amara took a bite and let the flavor melt away some of her earlier unease. Henry took his time, sipping his tea and watching the street outside. Carol, meanwhile, sat 2 tables away, tapping her spoon against her coffee cup and occasionally glancing their way. She seemed restless, as if her morning hadn't gone the way she planned. Henry didn't look at her once, but Amara noticed and quietly admired her grandfather's ability to keep his dignity no matter what. Outside, a breeze rustled the leaves along the sidewalk, and the sound of distant church bells floated through the air. For a moment, it felt like the unpleasantness from earlier might fade away, but somewhere inside, Amara carried the sting of those words, even if she didn't fully understand them yet. Henry, though, knew. He had faced such moments before in his life, and while he wished he could shield Amara from them forever, he also knew that life would offer her its own lessons. Some sweet like peach pie, others bitter like words left hanging in a cafe. Still, he believed something firmly. Kindness, when chosen over anger, always leaves a stronger mark. That morning, as the 2 of them shared the last crumbs of their pie, he hoped that Amara would remember not just the woman's remarks, but also the way they had chosen to rise above them, holding on to the simple joy of being together. The cafe had grown a little busier since Henry and Amara had arrived. The low hum of conversation filled the air, blending with the gentle clink of cups and the occasional hiss from the espresso machine. Sunlight streamed through the big front windows, catching the steam rising from hot mugs and making the room feel even warmer. At their small corner table, Henry and Amara quietly enjoyed their breakfast. Henry sipped his tea slowly, while Amara took careful bites of her peach pie, making each forkful last. From 2 tables away, Carol sat with her coffee, stirring it as though she were waiting for something to happen. Her eyes wandered the room, pausing every now and then on Henry and Amara. She leaned back in her chair looking like she had something to say. It didn't take long before her voice carried across the cafe again. This time she wasn't muttering to herself. She spoke in a tone that was loud enough for several customers to hear. "I always wonder," she said with a half-smile, "why people don't stick to their own places. Wouldn't that make life easier for everyone?" She glanced at the couple near her, as though inviting them to agree. The words were not shouted, but they seemed to hit the room like a drop of ink in clear water, spreading quietly yet visibly. A few heads turned in her direction. Some people looked down quickly, avoiding the awkwardness, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The cafe's warm air suddenly felt heavier. Amara froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Her eyes moved to her grandfather, searching his face for a reaction. Henry didn't respond. His hand stayed steady around his cup of tea. He was looking at her, not at Carol, as if to say with his eyes, "Don't let her take away our moment." But Carol didn't stop there. She took another sip of coffee, then chuckled softly, as though she were sharing a private joke with herself. "And the hair," she said, nodding slightly toward Amara, "must take forever to deal with." Amara's cheeks grew warm. She reached up and touched the yellow ribbon tied around her curls. It had been her favorite ribbon that morning, picked carefully from her little box at home. Now, the joy of wearing it felt dim. Henry placed his hand gently over hers on the table. "Your ribbon is beautiful," he said quietly, his voice calm but sure. Amara nodded, though she didn't smile. She could feel the curious eyes of other customers flicking between their table and Carol's. The barista behind the counter noticed the change in the room, but hesitated, unsure whether to step in. She glanced toward the manager, who was busy, in the back. The soft hum of the cafe had turned into a mix of quiet whispers and uncomfortable glances. Henry took another slow sip of tea. "Amara," he said in a low voice, meant just for her. "Some people speak before they think. That's not our way. We think before we speak." Amara wanted to believe him, but it was hard not to feel the sting of Carol's words. She kept her eyes on her plate, trying to focus on the pie instead of the woman sitting nearby. Carol, still in her seat, seemed to enjoy the attention her remarks were bringing. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and let out a satisfied breath. Two people in the cafe gave her a disapproving look, but no one spoke up. Henry noticed this too. He'd seen it many times before. The silence of those who disapproved but didn't want to get involved. He didn't judge them for it. Speaking up wasn't easy for everyone, and sometimes the best answer was to lead by example. Amara pushed her plate a little toward the center of the table. "Grandpa," she said softly, "why didn't you say anything?" Henry looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "Because not every battle is worth fighting with words. Sometimes the best thing you can do is show that you're not shaken." He picked up his fork and took a small bite of pie. "We know who we are. That's enough." She nodded slowly, though her heart still felt heavy. It wasn't the first time she'd seen someone act unkindly for no reason, but this moment felt different. It was in public, in a place she loved, and it had made her feel smaller than she wanted to admit. The cafe door opened again, letting in a burst of fresh air and the sound of footsteps. A couple walked in, greeting Henry with a friendly wave before heading to the counter. Their cheerful presence seemed to break some of the tension in the room. Henry glanced toward the window. Outside, the leaves on the street trees swayed gently in the breeze. Life was still moving, the world still turning, even in the middle of uncomfortable moments. He wanted Amara to see that, to understand that a few harsh words couldn't stop the good that still existed around them. Carol eventually stood up, finishing her coffee and gathering her bag. She passed by their table on her way out, giving a quick, dismissive glance. She didn't say anything this time, just pushed open the cafe door and walked out into the bright morning. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Henry reached for her plate, sliding it closer to her again. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's finish our pie. We don't waste good things." She picked up her fork again, taking another bite. It didn't taste quite as sweet as it had before, but she could feel her grandfather's words settling in her mind. They ate quietly for a while, the noise of the cafe slowly returning to normal as the moment passed. When they were done, Henry paid for their food at the counter and thanked the barista with a warm smile. The young woman gave him a knowing look, as if to say she admired the way he had handled the situation. Amara followed him out the door, the bell chiming behind them. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Henry took her hand. "You see, Amara," he said as they walked down the street, "people can choose to speak with kindness or without it. We can't control what they choose, but we can always control how we respond." Amara squeezed his hand and gave a small nod. The yellow ribbon in her hair swayed as she walked, and though the sting of the moment still lingered, she also carried with her a quiet pride. the kind that came from knowing she had stayed strong, just like her grandfather had taught her. The rest of Henry and Amara's Saturday went on quietly after they left the cafe. They walked through the park, stopped by the bookstore where Henry liked to browse history books, and then returned home with their fresh peaches and a small paper bag of pastries. The morning incident at the cafe still lingered in Amara's mind, but she pushed it aside, trying to enjoy the rest of the day. Henry didn't mention it again, and instead they talked about the garden, the changing weather, and Amara's upcoming school project. By early afternoon, Henry had settled into his armchair with a book, while Amara sat on the living room rug, drawing pictures with her colored pencils. The house was peaceful, filled with the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the faint scent of tea from the pot Henry had brewed earlier. It felt like the kind of day where nothing unexpected could happen. But then the phone rang. Henry reached over to answer it, listening quietly as the voice on the other end spoke. Amara noticed his calm expression change slightly. He set the book aside, stood up, and said in a steady tone, "I'll be there right away." When he hung up, Amara looked at him with curiosity. "Grandpa, who was it?" "It was the hospital," he replied, reaching for his coat. "They need me to come in. A patient has been brought in who might need special attention, and the doctor, on call, asked for my help." Amara's eyes brightened. She loved it when she got to go with him to the hospital. Henry wasn't just her grandpa. He was also a well-respected physician, though he didn't work full-time anymore. He had dedicated decades to caring for people, and even in retirement, he was often called when there was a difficult case. "Can I come?" she asked hopefully. Henry smiled. "If you promise to stay close and help where you can, yes." She nodded eagerly, slipping on her shoes. Minutes later, they were in Henry's old car, driving through the calm streets toward the hospital. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and the air was filled with the sound of distant church bells. Amara loved these drives with her grandfather. They always felt important, like they were going somewhere to make a difference. When they arrived at the hospital, the pace was very different from the peacefulness of the park and home. Nurses moved quickly through the halls, monitors beeped softly, and the air carried that faint scent of antiseptic and fresh linen. Henry signed in at the reception desk, and the charge nurse guided him toward the emergency room. As they reached the ER entrance, the double doors swung open with a rush of movement. A stretcher was being wheeled in by two paramedics. On it lay a woman, pale and breathing heavily, her hair damp with sweat. Amara noticed how tense everyone became, speaking in quick, focused tones. Henry stepped forward, scanning the patient's chart the paramedic handed him. But when he looked at the woman's face, he paused for a fraction of a second. He recognized her immediately. It was Carol, the same woman from the cafe that morning. Amara gasped softly, her eyes wide. She recognized Carol, too, and the memory of the morning's uncomfortable moments came flooding back. The difference now was startling. Carol no longer looked sharp and confident. Instead, she appeared fragile, her eyes darting around as though unsure of what was happening. The nurse looked at Henry expectantly. "Doctor, shall we move her to exam room 3? Henry gave a calm nod. "Yes, let's keep her stable. I'll assess her as soon as she's settled." Carol's eyes, still, alert despite her weakness, landed on Henry. At first there was no recognition, but then, as she took in the sight of him standing there in his white coat and Amara standing just behind him in her small Junior Med Club volunteer vest, her eyes widened. She seemed almost frozen, her mouth parting as if to speak. Henry didn't let the moment linger. "Let's focus on getting you comfortable," he said gently, moving alongside the stretcher as they wheeled her into the exam room. Amara followed quietly, keeping to the side as her grandfather had taught her. Inside the room, the nurses began their work, checking Carol's blood pressure, attaching a heart monitor, and preparing an IV. Henry washed his hands, then approached. her bedside with the calm, reassuring presence that had earned him respect from patients and colleagues alike. "How are you feeling right now?" he asked, his tone warm but professional. Carol swallowed, her voice faint. I'm having trouble breathing. My chest feels tight." Henry nodded. "We'll take care of you. I'm going to listen to your heart and lungs. Just relax." Amara stood in the corner, watching as her grandfather worked. She noticed that he didn't treat Carol any differently from any other patient, even though the morning's events were still fresh in both their minds. His voice stayed steady, his hands gentle as he adjusted the stethoscope. Carol seemed to struggle with more than just her breathing. Her eyes kept flicking toward Amara, then back to Henry, as if she was trying to reconcile the man caring for her now with the man she had spoken so sharply to earlier. When Henry stepped away for a moment to review her initial test results, Carol turned her head slightly toward Amara. You're his granddaughter?" she asked in a hesitant voice. Amara nodded slowly. Carol's lips parted again, but no words came out right away. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't know." Amara didn't reply. She wasn't sure what to say. The room was filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the quiet movement of nurses, and she simply kept her hands clasped in front of her, standing tall the way her grandfather always did. Henry returned with a small smile meant to put Carol at ease. "We're going to run a few more tests, but I think we can get you feeling better soon. Try to rest." Carol nodded, her gaze dropping. Her expression had changed. There was no trace of the smugness she'd shown at the cafe. Instead, there was something softer in her eyes, something that looked almost like regret. As the nurses continued their work, Henry motioned for Amara to follow him just outside the room. "We'll give them space to finish up," he said. They stepped into the hallway, where Henry explained a few simple medical terms to her, turning it into a small lesson. Amara listened closely, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in the bed. She remembered the way Carol's words had felt that morning, heavy and sharp, and now she saw her in a completely different way, vulnerable, scared, and relying on the kindness of others. It was a strange feeling, and Amara didn't know exactly how to process it. Before long, a nurse called Henry back in to check on Carol again. Amara followed. Carol's breathing had steadied a little, and some of the tension in her face had eased. When she looked at Henry this time, her voice was quiet but clear. "Thank you for helping me." Henry gave a small nod. "It's what we do. Everyone deserves care when they need it." Amara felt those words sink deep into her heart. She realized her grandfather wasn't just talking to Carol, he was teaching her too. Even when someone had been unkind, compassion was still the better choice. The rest of the afternoon passed in a steady rhythm of care and quiet observation. Carol's condition improved bit by bit, and though she didn't say much more, the change in her eyes spoke volumes. She had seen something she hadn't expected. The same people she had looked down on earlier were now the ones standing beside her, when she was at her weakest. When Henry and Amara finally left the hospital that evening, the sun was dipping low in the sky, painting the horizon with shades of gold and pink. As they walked to the car, Amara slipped her hand into her grandfather's. "Grandpa," she said softly, "I think I understand now." Henry glanced down at her with a smile. "Understand what?" "That sometimes," she said, "kindness says more than words ever could." Henry's smile widened. "Exactly." They drove home in peaceful silence, the hum of the engine blending with the fading sounds of the day, carrying with them the quiet truth of what they had experienced. The next morning, Henry woke to the soft light spilling through the curtains, casting warm lines across the living room. Amara was already awake, sitting at the small table near the window, carefully arranging her colored pencils and drawing paper. She had decided to sketch a picture of the hospital from the day before, with tiny figures of nurses, doctors, and patients. "Good morning, Amara," Henry said, stepping into the room with a mug of tea. "Good morning, Grandpa," she replied, not taking her eyes off the paper. "I was thinking about yesterday." Henry took a sip of tea and sat beside her. "Yes?" he asked. "I mean, Carol," Amara said slowly. "The woman from the cafe. I can't stop thinking about her. She seemed so different yesterday at the hospital than she was in the cafe. She looked scared, and I think she realized something." Henry nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "She did," he said quietly. "Sometimes people say things or act in ways that aren't kind, but it often comes from fear, insecurity, or just not understanding. Being in a place where someone depends on you can show a completely different side of a person." Amara listened carefully, trying to understand. She looked at her drawing and then back at her grandfather. "Do you think she regrets what she said to us?" "I believe she does," Henry replied, "and that's why she was quiet. Regret is a good sign. It means she is capable of change." Amara smiled, though it was small. "I want to believe that," she said. After breakfast, Henry received a phone call from the hospital. It was one of the nurses updating him on Carol's condition. She had slept well through the night and was stable. The nurse mentioned that Carol had asked for him by name. Henry promised he would visit later in the day. Amara decided to go along. She wanted to see for herself how someone who had been unkind could start to show a change. She also wanted to learn more from her grandfather about handling difficult situations. When they arrived at the hospital, Carol was awake, sitting in a chair by the window in her room. Sunlight warmed the floor, and the soft hum of hospital activity drifted in through the slightly open door. She looked up as they entered, and her expression changed immediately. There was a flicker of recognition and a hint of shame in her eyes. "Good morning, Carol," Henry said warmly. "How are you feeling today?" I'm better, thank you," she replied, her voice quiet and a little hesitant. She looked at Amara and then back at Henry. I wanted to apologize for yesterday at the cafe. I wasn't thinking, and I spoke in a way that wasn't right." Henry smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake. I hope you understand that words can hurt, but they can also be followed by better actions." Carol nodded, her gaze dropping for a moment. Amara felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was the first time the morning incident truly felt like it had ended. "I was wrong," Carol said again, this time more firmly. "I judged too quickly. I see now that I don't know people's stories just by looking at them. I hope you can forgive me." Henry placed a hand on hers briefly. "Forgiveness is always possible. What matters most is that we try to learn from our mistakes. Everyone has a chance to change, Carol, including all of us." Amara felt inspired. She could see the change happening before her eyes. Carol's shoulders seemed less tense, and her eyes were softer, no longer filled with judgment. "I wanted to, make things right," Carol continued, her voice wavering. "I saw you caring for me yesterday, and I realized how wrong I was. I don't want to be someone who hurts others with my words." Henry nodded. "And you won't be if you keep choosing kindness. That's the lesson, really. Words are powerful, but actions show who we truly are." Carol glanced at Amara, and for the first time, she smiled slightly. "And you, young lady," she said, "I see that you have a strong heart. Your grandfather is right. You have a choice to be kind and brave. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Amara felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her gaze steady. "Thank you," she said softly. "I won't forget that." Henry looked at both of them, proud of his granddaughter. Sometimes, seeing someone in a vulnerable place teaches lessons that words alone cannot. You've both learned something important today. The conversation continued for a while, gentle and calm. Carol talked about her mistake, her fears, and how seeing Henry care for her despite everything had opened her eyes. She asked questions about the hospital, about caring for patients, and about Amara's school project. Amara answered confidently, showing Carol the drawing she had made of the hospital scene. Carol's eyes lit up with curiosity. "These are wonderful," she said. "You see things clearly and with care. That's rare." Henry smiled. "She's learning well," he said, looking at Amara. "But you see, Carol, life sometimes gives us moments that remind us who we want to be. Yesterday was one of those moments for you. It's never too late to choose the better path." Carol nodded, her expression sincere. "I will remember that. I want to be better." As the afternoon passed, Henry and Amara stayed long enough to make sure Carol was comfortable and had everything she needed. The nurses came in and out, attending to other patients, but the sense of calm in the room remained. When it was time to leave, Henry stood and looked at Carol one last time. "Take care of yourself. Keep learning and keep being kind. That's all any of us can do." Carol reached out, offering a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, both of you," she said. "I mean it." Amara felt her heart swell. She realized that the moments that had seemed hurtful at first could turn into lessons in ways she never imagined. Carol had changed, and it reminded her that everyone had the ability to learn, grow, and do better. Outside, the sunlight was softer now, filtering through the trees as they walked to the car. Henry held the door for Amara, and she stepped in, her mind filled with thoughts about kindness, change, and forgiveness. On the drive home, they didn't speak much. Words weren't needed. Amara looked out the window, watching people pass by, thinking about how different life could be when people chose understanding over judgment. When they arrived home, Henry brewed another pot of tea, and they sat in the quiet of the living room. Amara pulled out her drawings again and began to color, feeling lighter than she had all morning. Henry watched her, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You know, Amara," he said softly, "every experience is a lesson. Some are obvious, some are hidden, but each one shapes who we are. You handled yesterday well. Carol learned a lesson, and so did you." Amara looked up and nodded. "I think I understand, Grandpa. People can make mistakes, but we can choose to respond with kindness, and that can change everything." Henry reached over, ruffling her hair gently. "Exactly. And sometimes we even help someone see that themselves." As the day moved toward evening, the house was calm. The soft light from the setting sun filled the rooms with warmth. Amara's drawings lay scattered across the table, filled with bright colors and careful details. It was a reminder of everything she had learned, about patience, compassion, and the quiet power of showing care when others might not expect it. Henry sipped his tea and looked out the window, thinking about the day's events. What had begun as a difficult moment in a cafe had grown into a lesson in forgiveness and understanding. Carol's regret had been sincere, and the actions that followed proved that even small gestures of kindness could make a big difference. Amara finished her coloring and held up her drawing, showing it proudly. Henry leaned over, examining it carefully. "This is excellent," he said. "You captured more than just the scene, you captured the heart of it." Amara beamed. "It's about more than what we see, Grandpa. It's about what we feel and how we act." Henry nodded, his eyes warm. "You've understood it well. That's the kind of lesson that lasts a lifetime." The evening wore on, and the house settled into a peaceful quiet. Outside, the last Light of the sun faded, leaving the sky a soft shade of blue. Inside, Amara and Henry sat together, enjoying the simple comfort of home, their hearts lighter, their minds full of understanding, and their spirits quietly uplifted by the events of the day. The next morning, Henry and Amara woke to a quiet house. The sun poured through the curtains, filling the living room with a warm glow. After breakfast, Amara sat at the table, carefully reviewing her drawings from the previous days. Each picture told a story: the cafe, the hospital, and the people they had met along the way. She smiled as she realized how much she had learned from the events that unfolded. "Grandpa," she said, looking up at Henry, "I've been thinking a lot about Carol. I hope she's really changing. I want to believe she's learning from what happened." Henry nodded slowly, taking a sip of his tea. "Amara, people can change if they truly want to. What matters most is their actions after they realize their mistakes. Yesterday, she started down that path. Now it's up to her to keep walking." Amara thought about it for a moment. "I wonder, could we help her? Maybe show her how to be kinder to others?" Henry smiled gently. "Sometimes, helping someone means giving them a chance to take responsibility themselves. But we can guide them, yes, and that can make a big difference." Just then, the phone rang. It was the hospital. Carol wanted to speak with Henry and Amara again. She had asked the nurse to call them personally, saying she had something important to share. Henry picked up the phone. "Hello, this is Henry." "Mr. Henry?" Carol's voice sounded softer, calmer than the day before. I wanted to say thank you again for everything. I've been thinking a lot, and I want to do something to make up for my behavior at the cafe." Henry's eyes met Amara's. "That's very thoughtful, Carol. What do you have in mind?" I want to help," she said. "I know it may not erase what I said, but I want to do something good for the people I hurt, for you and your granddaughter, and for anyone who might face someone like me in the future." Henry smiled. "That's a wonderful idea. We can talk about some ways you can help once you feel better. Small acts of kindness can go a long way." Carol thanked him and hung up. Amara's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Grandpa, do you think she really means it?" "I do," Henry said. Her voice sounded sincere. "People often realize their mistakes when they see kindness in action. That's what happened yesterday, and now she wants to respond in a positive way." After finishing their morning routine, Henry and Amara decided to visit the cafe where the incident had first occurred. They wanted to see if Carol had followed through on her promise to make amends. When they arrived, they saw a familiar figure standing near the counter. Carol was talking to the cafe manager, helping organize trays and wiping down tables. Her movements were careful, her expression focused, and there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Amara watched quietly, impressed. "Grandpa, she's really doing it," she whispered. Henry nodded. "Actions speak louder than words. This is how she shows she's changing." Carol noticed them and waved shyly. "Hi, Henry. Hi, Amara. Thank you for coming." Amara smiled. "Hi, Carol. I'm proud of you." Carol's cheeks flushed slightly. "Thank you. I wanted to make things right. I started by volunteering. Here today, helping with the customers and the staff. It's a small step, but I want to do more." Henry placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. "See, Amara? This is exactly what I was talking about. Change starts with small actions. Carol is choosing to be better." Amara's eyes followed Carol as she moved around the cafe, assisting an elderly customer with her tray. Carol's voice was gentle and patient, and she even made the customer laugh with a light-hearted comment. Amara felt a warmth in her chest, the kind that comes when you witness someone truly trying to improve themselves. As the day passed, Henry and Amara spent time with Carol at the cafe, observing and helping when they could. They noticed how much effort she put into her actions, how carefully she treated every person she interacted with. Each small gesture of kindness showed that her apology was not just words, it was genuine. Later, they sat together at a corner table, enjoying a cup of coffee. "Carol," Henry said softly, "I can see you've learned an important lesson. What you did at the cafe may have been hurtful, but you've turned it into an opportunity to grow. That's what life is really about. Learning from our mistakes and doing better next time." Carol nodded, her eyes glistening. "I understand now. I see how much my words can affect others. I never want to hurt anyone again. Seeing you take care of me, even after I was unkind, showed me what true kindness looks like." Amara leaned forward, her eyes bright. "And remember, it's never too late to change, Carol. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." Carol smiled, a genuine smile this time, free of shame or fear. "Thank you, both of you. You've given me hope that I can be better. I want to keep making good choices." Henry reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "You already are, Carol. Keep following this path, and you'll find that life can be much more rewarding when we choose understanding and kindness over judgment and fear." Amara watched the three of them together and felt a deep sense of happiness. She realized that sometimes difficult moments could become turning points in life. A harsh word, a misunderstanding, or a mistake could lead to learning, growth, and even stronger connections between people. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Carol hugged Amara and Henry. "Thank you for believing in me," she said. "I promise I won't forget this lesson." "You don't have to promise," Henry replied. "Your actions will show it." Walking back to the car, Amara felt lighter than she had in days. "Grandpa, I'm glad we went to see her today," she said. "I think this is the start of something good, not just for her, but for all of us." Henry nodded. "It is, Amara. Sometimes the world can seem unfair or unkind. But moments like this remind us that change is possible, and that compassion can create a ripple effect that reaches farther than we can imagine." The next few weeks passed quietly but meaningfully. Carol continued to volunteer at the cafe and began participating in community events, helping organize food drives and assisting elderly neighbors with errands. Each small act demonstrated her genuine desire to make amends and grow into a kinder, more thoughtful person. Amara followed her progress closely, drawing pictures of Carol's good deeds and writing notes about the lessons she learned. She noticed how people's attitudes toward Carol changed as they saw her efforts. Smiles replaced frowns, and trust grew where doubt had once lingered. Henry observed it all with quiet pride. "Amara," he said one evening, "life teaches us lessons in ways we often don't expect. Yesterday's conflict at the cafe became today's story of change and understanding. People can surprise us with their growth when given the chance." Amara nodded. "I understand, Grandpa, and I want to be like that too, to learn from mistakes, to help others, and to make the world a better place in my own way." Henry smiled warmly. "You already are, Amara. Every choice you make, every act of kindness, sets an example. That's how change spreads, one small step at a time." Months later, Henry and Amara returned to the cafe, not as visitors, but as friends. Carol greeted them with a cheerful wave, and they spent time together, sharing stories, laughter, and the satisfaction of knowing that one difficult encounter had led to real, positive change. Amara looked around the cafe and realized that kindness, understanding, and forgiveness were powerful tools. They could transform lives, heal old wounds, and even create new opportunities for connection and growth. As they left the cafe that day, Amara held her grandfather's hand tightly. "I think I understand it all now," she said softly. "Sometimes people say and do the wrong things, but if we give them a chance and show them kindness, they can change. And when they do, the world becomes a little brighter." Henry squeezed her hand in agreement. "Exactly, Amara. And that brightness doesn't just stay with them. It spreads, reaching everyone around them. That's the real lesson." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Henry and Amara walked home slowly, enjoying the peaceful evening, feeling grateful for the lessons they had learned and for the unexpected journey that had started with a simple act of unkindness, but ended in understanding, forgiveness, and hope. Amara knew she would remember this day forever. The day she witnessed the power of change, the strength of compassion, and the way even the smallest gestures of care could transform lives. And she felt certain that this lesson would guide her throughout her own life, shaping her into someone who could always choose kindness, no matter the circumstances. As they reached their home, Amara looked up at the sky one last time, taking in the soft, fading light. She felt a quiet joy, knowing that sometimes even the hardest moments could lead to the most beautiful changes. And in that knowledge,